164 people are confirmed dead in Venezuela right now. The real number is almost certainly far higher. A computer model run by the United States Geological Survey looked at the magnitude, the depth, and the millions of people living above the fault, and it projected a death toll in the thousands, with a real chance of exceeding 100,000. The earthquakes are over. The counting is not. In the next 20 minutes, I'll show you why the toll is still climbing, why the danger hasn't passed, and what the science says comes next. The confirmed death toll in northern Venezuela now stands at least 164 people, with more than 971 injured. That is the official figure released by acting President Delcy Rodriguez, and it is the most important thing to understand about it. It is not a final number. It is a floor. In the first hours after the ground stopped moving on Wednesday evening, the confirmed count was far lower, on the order of 32 dead and around 700 injured. More than a day later, that number has climbed past 160, and every official statement coming out of Caracas stresses the same thing. These figures are preliminary. They are expected to rise. The count is moving in one direction, and that direction is up. This is the part of an earthquake that the cameras rarely capture, because it happens slowly in the spaces between the dramatic footage. The shaking lasts seconds. The dying does not. People are still trapped in collapsed buildings across northern Venezuela right now. Rescue crews are still cutting through concrete in neighborhoods they have only just reached. Entire communities near the epicenters remain hard to contact, their roads blocked, their power and phone lines down. Until those crews reach the worst of the rubble, the official toll cannot tell you how bad this is. It can only tell you how much we have managed to confirm so far. And what we have confirmed is already the deadliest day Venezuela has lived through in generations. Here is the figure that should stop you cold. While the confirmed toll sits in the hundreds, the computer model that the United States Geological Survey runs after every major earthquake, a system called PAGER, projected something far worse within minutes of the rupture. PAGER does not wait for bodies to be counted. It looks at the magnitude, the depth, the population living above the fault, and the kind of buildings they live in, and it estimates the likely death toll before anyone on the ground can. For this earthquake, PAGER did not return a number in the hundreds. It returned a number in the thousands, and it kept going. The model assigned roughly a 44% probability that the final death toll will land somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 people, and it assigned a further 30% probability that the toll will exceed 100,000. Put those together, and you are looking at a model that considers a 5-figure death toll the most likely outcome, and a 6-figure death toll a real possibility. That is not a tabloid headline. That is an automated scientific tool run the same way it is run after every red alert quake on Earth, telling us that the gap between 164 confirmed dead and what is actually buried in the rubble could be measured in the tens of thousands. I want to be careful here, because that range is enormous, and the honest truth is that we do not yet know where inside it this disaster will land. PAGER is a probability distribution, not a prophecy. The final toll could come in well below the worst projections if the building collapses were less complete than feared, or if more people were outdoors in the early evening than the model assumes. But it could also climb toward those numbers if the hardest hit zones are as bad as the early images from Caracas suggest. The point of the model is not to predict the exact figure. The point is to tell rescuers, governments, and aid agencies how big a catastrophe to prepare for while the real count is still days away. And the answer it gave was, prepare for thousands. The distance between 164 and the thousands, the model projects, is the most unsettling feature of this entire event. So it is worth explaining exactly why that gap exists. It is not a contradiction, and it is not a cover-up. It is the normal, grim shape of the first 48 hours after a great earthquake. In those first hours, almost no verified information escapes the worst-hit areas, precisely because those areas are the ones where the roads are blocked, the cell towers are down, and the survivors are too busy digging to file reports. The confirmed toll only counts the dead who have already been found, identified, and reported up the chain. Everyone still under a collapsed building, in a town the rescuers have not yet reached, is invisible to that number. So the catastrophe is, in a sense, already complete. It happened on Wednesday evening in 39 seconds. The buildings that fell have already fallen. The people inside them are already lost or already saved. What is happening now is not the disaster getting worse. It is the slow, painful arithmetic of a confirmed number crawling upward to meet a reality a machine already estimated in the dark. That is why you should expect the headline figure to keep climbing over the coming days, and you should not be shocked when it does. A rising toll after an earthquake this size is not new information. It is the confirmation catching up to what the physics already guaranteed. The mechanics of that counting are brutal and worth understanding. Each confirmed death has to be physically reached, recovered, identified, and reported before it enters the official total. And in a disaster, This size, every one of those steps is fighting against blocked roads, downed communications, and rescue crews who are stretched impossibly thin. Hospitals near the epicenters are overwhelmed, treating the injured while the dead wait. The number you hear on the news is therefore always a lagging indicator. It tells you what has been processed, not what has happened. In past disasters of comparable scale, the confirmed toll has sometimes taken weeks to stabilize, climbing steadily as access improves, and then climbing again as the most isolated communities are finally reached. There is every reason to expect the same pattern here, which means the 164 we have today is almost certainly one of the smallest numbers we will ever associate with this event. To understand why this particular earthquake is so deadly, you have to understand what actually happened on Wednesday evening, because it was not one earthquake, it was two. At 4 minutes and 32 seconds past 6 in the evening, local time, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake ruptured near San Felipe, the capital of Yaracuy State, west of Caracas. 39 seconds later, a second and larger earthquake, a magnitude 7.5, tore through the crust just to the north near the town of Umare. Both were extraordinarily shallow, centered only about 10 kilometers below the surface. Both struck along the boundary where the Caribbean and South American tectonic plates grind past each other. Two great earthquakes on neighboring stretches of the same fault, less than a minute apart. Seismologists call this configuration a doublet, and it is rare. Most earthquake doublets that we have on record are separated by hours, days, or even weeks. The two enormous quakes that devastated Turkey in 2023 were about 9 hours apart. 39 seconds is something else entirely. It means the first rupture's seismic waves and sudden stress change reached over to the neighboring segment of fault and shoved it past its breaking point almost instantly. For the people standing on the ground above it, there was no pause, no warning, no moment to run. The second, larger shock arrived while the earth was still moving from the first. It was one continuous, escalating wave of destruction, and the larger of the two came second. By the measure of raw magnitude, this is the most powerful earthquake to strike Venezuela since 1900, when a magnitude 7.7 quake hit the country. That is a span of roughly 125 years. Essentially, no one alive in Venezuela today has experienced anything like it. The fault that produced it has been quietly storing this energy for over a century, sliding only about 2 centimeters a year, locking and loading until it released more than 100 years of accumulated strain in the space of a single, terrible minute. The destruction was worst near the epicenters, in the towns of Umare, Moron, and San Felipe, where the ground motion was most violent. But the images that have shocked the world are coming from Caracas, the capital, even though it sits a considerable distance from where the fault actually broke. Dozens of buildings across Caracas collapsed or were severely damaged, including a bank. The districts of Los Palos Grandes and Altamira are among the worst hit. In parts of southeastern Caracas, witnesses described nearly every high-rise building as heavily damaged or destroyed, with many collapsing outright. Those are residential towers, full of families in a city of millions. The damage did not stop at the capital. Building collapses have been reported across a wide band of northern Venezuela, in Trujillo, in Carabobo, in Aragua, in Miranda, and in La Guaira. Simón Bolívar International Airport, the country's main gateway to the world, sustained structural damage, and all arriving and departing flights were canceled, complicating the very rescue and aid effort that the country now desperately needs. Acting President Rodriguez declared a national state of emergency and suspended schools and non-essential activities across the affected region. And across that whole region, people did the only thing they could. They poured into the streets. They stayed there for hours, afraid to go back inside their own homes because of what might come next. That fear is not irrational. It is the most rational response possible because the danger genuinely has not passed. Every great earthquake is followed by aftershocks, and the larger the main shock, the larger and more numerous they are. The United States Geological Survey's forecast for the days after this doublet is sobering. It projected roughly 26 aftershocks of magnitude, 4 or greater within the first 24 hours alone. It rated a magnitude 5 or greater aftershock as all but certain. And it put the probability of a magnitude 6 or greater aftershock, an earthquake that would be a major disaster on its own in many parts of the world, at around 40% within the following week. One aftershock of about magnitude 4.5 was already recorded near Caucaguito, closer to the Caracas metropolitan area, within roughly 20 minutes of the main shock. There is a rule of thumb in seismology called Both's Law that says the largest aftershock usually runs about 1 full magnitude unit below the main shock. For a magnitude 7.5 event, that points to a credible aftershock somewhere in the mid to high magnitude 6 range. There is also a pattern to when these aftershocks come. described by something called Omori's law, which says the rate of aftershocks is highest in the hours immediately after the main shock, and then decays over time, roughly in proportion to 1 divided by the time elapsed. What that means in plain terms is that the shaking does not just stop. It tapers, slowly, over days and weeks and sometimes months, and at any point along that tapering curve, the single largest aftershock can strike. The danger does not end when the news cameras leave. And here is why that matters so much for the people of northern Venezuela right now. The buildings that are still standing are not the buildings they were a few days ago. They have been cracked, shaken, and structurally weakened by the doublet. A magnitude 5.5 aftershock, the kind that would be frightening but survivable in an undamaged city, can be the thing that finally brings down a building the first 2 quakes already compromised. The aftershocks do not need to be as large as the main shock to kill. They only need to find a building that is already broken. That is the literal scientific reason this story is far from over. The reason a doublet is so much deadlier than a single earthquake of the same size is not simple addition. It is multiplication. And the mechanism is worth understanding because it explains both why the toll is so high and why the danger continues. When the first rupture hits, it cracks and shears and weakens buildings without always destroying them. People inside who survive that first shock may freeze or run for an exit or be trapped. Some rush back in to find family. And then, before anyone can do anything, the second and larger rupture arrives and slams into structures that have already used up their margin of safety. Buildings that would have withstood a single magnitude 7.5 collapse when it is the second blow in under a minute. There is no time to evacuate. There is no time to assess. There is barely time to understand what is happening. We have a recent horrifying reference for exactly this. The earthquake doublet that struck Turkey and Syria in 2023 killed more than 50,000 people. And a major reason the toll was so catastrophic was that second great rupture falling on a region the first had already shattered. That event also showed another feature that scientists will now be looking for in Venezuela. Some powerful strike-slip earthquakes rupture so fast that they break the local sound barrier of the rock itself, propagating faster than the seismic shear waves can travel. It is called super shear rupture, and it focuses energy into a sharper, more violent front of shaking. The Turkey doublet did this. Whether either of the Venezuela ruptures went super shear will take detailed analysis of the seismic recordings to determine, and I want to be clear that it is an open question, not a confirmed fact. But if it happened, it would help explain why the damage was so severe, so far from the epicenters. The deeper physics behind all of this is something called stress transfer. When a fault slips, it does not just release its own stored stress, it redistributes that stress onto the rock around it, including onto neighboring faults. Usually that loading plays out over months or years, and it is how many aftershocks and triggered quakes happen long after the fact. In Venezuela, it appears to have happened in seconds. The first ruptures passing waves nudging an already critically loaded neighbor into failure almost instantly. The same process that produced the doublet is the process now playing out, more slowly, across the entire fault system. And that brings us straight back to the central worry. The energy released on Wednesday did not vanish. Some of it was passed along to the rock next door. There's a question buried in all of this that explains the terrifying pager projection, and it is this. Why is Caracas so vulnerable to an earthquake whose epicenter was so far away? The answer is the ground the city is built on. Caracas sits in a narrow valley filled with soft sediments, and soft ground does something dangerous during an earthquake. It traps and amplifies the seismic energy and stretches out the duration of the shaking. Worse, it tends to amplify exactly the frequencies at which tall buildings naturally sway. Hard bedrock shrugs off a distant earthquake. A soft sedimentary basin can take that same distant earthquake and ring like a bell, shaking high-rise towers far harder and far longer than the raw distance would suggest. We know this is what happened because we have seen this exact city do this exact thing before. In 1967, a much smaller earthquake, around magnitude 6.5, struck near Caracas and collapsed several modern high-rise buildings, killing about 240 people. The collapses were concentrated in specific neighborhoods, including Los Palos Grandes, the same district being named among the worst hit in this new disaster. The basin underneath those neighborhoods funneled the shaking into the towers above them then, and it appears to have done precisely the same thing again now. The magnitude of an earthquake delivers the energy. But it is the city, its ground, its buildings, the hour of day when people are home, that converts that energy into a death toll. That is why the same physical event in a differently built city would kill a fraction as many people, and it is why the model fears the number could climb so steeply here. This fault has a long and brutal memory, and it has killed this region before. In 1812, an earthquake estimated at around magnitude 7.7 destroyed Caracas and killed an estimated 30,000 people, and it also severely damaged San Felipe, the very city named at the center of Wednesday's first rupture. It struck on the same fault system. 2 centuries later, the same boundary, grinding past at the same couple of centimeters a year, broke again in nearly the same place. The Caribbean and South American plates do not care that a capital city was built on top of their seam. They will keep moving whether anyone is watching or not. And the record shows they have produced damaging earthquakes in this country at least 180 times across 4 centuries. By for 4 guys. So where does this go from here, and what should you actually be watching for in the coming days? The first thing is the toll itself. Expect the confirmed number to keep rising, possibly sharply, as rescue crews reach the towns and buildings that have been cut off. That rise will not mean the situation is deteriorating. It will mean the counting is finally catching up to the reality the rubble has held since Wednesday. The second thing to watch is the aftershock sequence. The window of greatest danger is right now and over the next several days, and the single most important question is whether that 40% chance of a magnitude 6 or greater aftershock comes due, because it would fall on a building stock that is already broken. The third thing, and the one that seismologists will be watching most closely, is the rest of the fault. The boundary that ruptured runs as a system of connected faults, stretching about 1,300 kilometers across the top of Venezuela, threading directly through the corridor that holds Caracas, Valencia, and Maracay. The doublet released a century of stored strain on one stretch of it, and, through stress transfer, loaded the segments next door. Whether those neighboring segments, some of them closer to Caracas itself, have been pushed toward their own failure is now the urgent scientific question, and it is one that only careful monitoring over the coming weeks can begin to answer. For now, the immediate reality is a rescue race against time, an international aid effort already mobilizing from the United States, China, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and others, and a country sleeping in the streets. The earthquakes are over. The disaster is not. The confirmed toll of 164 is a number that will grow. The aftershock threat is real and present, and the fault that did this has done it before and will do it again. The most honest thing anyone can say tonight is that we are still in the middle of this, not at the end of it, and the next number we hear will almost certainly be larger than the last.